Hi, I'm Linda Quinlan.
I'm Keith Ghostland.
I'm Ann Charles. Welcome to All Things LGBTQ. We're taping on Tuesday, January 30th, and we have a lot in store for you today.
Hi, and I guess I will start with the national headlines. There is a Mormon rock band called Dragon, and unfortunately the Senate confirms Kansas Governor Brownback to head the Office of International Religious Freedom.
Ooh.
A prosecutor in Cincinnati, Ohio, is asking a judge to let a 17-year-old trans boy live with his grandparents. Federal appeals court sides with lesbian firefighter. Former Amazon employee convicted of a federal hate crime. Wedgwood Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, has been vandalized again with anti-gay graffiti on its building. America is less accepting of LGBTQ people. There are a couple of films out. One is The Miseducation of Cameron Post and Freak Show. And then there's a man accused of stabbing to death a gay 19-year-old. A viral video by a Christian company. Bob Smith dies at 52, the comedian. Carl Higbie resigns. And I'd like to do a memoriam for Alberta Perkins. So we'll get to that later. And on to the international news. Or the local news, sorry, local.
Oh, well.
Apparently, I'm not here tonight.
You're chopped liver.
Local, sorry.
Fake news. First thing, our trivia question for this week, and we all had to look for the answer to this one. This was the first known gay youth organization in the U.S. And in deference to tonight's State of the State address, I have a quote from Jon Stewart. "I don't approve of political jokes. I've seen too many of them get elected." Just a brief comment, there was a Gallup poll looking at 45's favorability rating, such as it is. Coming in at 61% favorable was West Virginia. 26% favorability, the lowest of any state, might be ours, Vermont.
Hey.
UVM has archived all of the Out in the Mountains in a digital format. Matt's going to be putting up the site where you can... Zach. Who did I say?
Matt.
Who is Matt?
I don't know.
Who
And tell us what Out in the Mountains
Who did
is
I
for
sleep
our
with
younger
last night?
viewers. Tell us what Out in the Mountains is.
Out in the Mountains was Vermont's lesbian, gay, bisexual newspaper, and it was the means by which we communicated with each other. We shared the type of information that we share on this show. What are the issues of importance? What it is that was happening in Vermont, particularly in a political vein. Part of Out in the Mountains' genesis was we had introduced an anti-discrimination bill into the legislature to ensure our full equality. And Out in the Mountains is the means by which we communicated with each other what needed to be done, what had been done, and how we were moving forward. Thank you.
A little old-fashioned Facebook.
Print media.
Love the book. Just a brief remembering, Mathilde, and Anne will tell me the correct German pronunciation when we get there. Aetna, remember them and their disclosure of HIV status? They've reached a settlement. We now know how much an HIV-positive person is worth. Tonight is the legislature's public hearing on firearms, and I'll go through each bill later on, but those people supporting the legislation are wearing purple, such as we are tonight. Vermont media, another incident with 7 days. Do they need some LGBT 101 training? They seem to be getting it wrong more often than not these days. Department of Justice targets Burlington as the sanctuary city, looking at their fair and impartial policing policies. They want them to ask and turn over immigration information, which is unconstitutional. And I just might comment that it's a little coincidental that they're picking the city where Bernie Sanders started his political career. Primary Care Network. Doesn't look as though the feds are going to fund the rural health clinics, what we need to have done here in Vermont. Last piece, tomorrow, Bill Lippert, representative from Heinsberg, our longest serving openly gay legislator, will be introducing a bill that will create a breach of the peace, unauthorized taping at peer support groups. Stay tuned. Now the international.
All right.
And we're going to exotic places.
We are. We're starting with Tunisia.
Never been there.
I wouldn't recommend traveling there,
Okay.
but they're having their first queer film festival.
It didn't last long.
No, it's going on.
Oh, it's going on
It's
still,
been going
okay.
on for several days, and now it's continuing into
Good.
next week. The police, however, has dispersed some LGBT protesters in Tunisia. Jamaica, another country with a very dismal record for LGBT equality, has banned an anti-gay Arizona pastor from visiting the country. This is great news, and maybe
Wow.
Jamaican activists are suggesting it signals a little progress. Laverne Cox. That's a story. She becomes the first trans woman on the cover of Cosmopolitan, to those of you who are unfamiliar with the publication. Myanmar's biggest LGBT event is returning to Yangon, which used to be Rangoon, because Myanmar used to be Burma. In lawsuit, same-sex couples say the U.S. wrongly denied their children's citizenship. A Cuban woman with her same-sex partner has granted custody of her daughter's children. The daughter died. And so this is a breakthrough in Cuban politics also. Most Indonesians, and these are stories I'm probably not going to get to, most Indonesians feel threatened by the LGBT community, according to a survey, 90% to be approximate.
Whoa.
Anti-transgender violence, again, in Pakistan. Violent deaths of LGBT people in Brazil hit an all-time high. And a Toronto gay man is accused of murder. A Toronto man was accused of murdering gay men, and he's been on the police radar since last fall. So those are my headlines.
So back to local. No, I'm
I think you just mix it up. Whoever speaks first,
yeah.
Oh,
Well, I was looking that way. No, anyway. So there's a Mormon frontman of the rock band Imagine Dragons, and he hopes the Sundance Film Festival documentary that follows his journey to becoming an advocate for the LGBT Mormon youth, and it triggers real change by his church leaders, and they will stop shaming the gay and lesbian kids in their faith. He said he made the film Believer to put a face to the faceless and a voice to the voiceless. His goal is to show leaders from the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints that opposition to same-sex relationships is damaging the self-worth of gay, lesbian, and transgender kids. These kids are being told that their most intimate sense of being is sinful, and a Mormon, and shaming is so destructive. So if you get to see the film, it's an Utah-based Mormon faith of 16 million members worthwhile, holding firm to opposition to gay marriage and homosexual activity while trying to foster an empathetic stance towards LGBTQ people and end bullying. Last year, the church leaders updated a website created in 2012 to let members know that attraction to people of the same sex is not a sin or a measure of their faithfulness and may never go away. But the church reminded members that being in an intimate same-sex relationship is a sin because it violates fundamental doctrinal beliefs that will not change.
This is the magic underwear people, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And on other news, the Senate, and now we can make noises.
We did before.
I know. Confirmed arch-conservative Kansas Governor Sam Brownback to lead the Office of International Religious Freedom at the State Department, a position often called the Religious Freedom Ambassador. The vote was 49 to 49, with all Republicans voting to confirm and all Democrats voting against confirmation.
Luckily, Pence stepped in.
Yes, and
seal
Republican
the
senators
deal.
were not present for the
We've got
vote.
to trip him.
Yes,
Sorry.
Yeah.
that's okay. 2 Republican senators weren't there for the vote, and Mike Pence had to break the tie. So we're lucky he was there, weren't we?
Mm-hmm.
During the confirmation hearings, Brownback, who has long history of anti-LGBTQ statements and policies, refused to make even the smallest commitment to supporting LGBTQ rights. Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, asked Brownback why, as governor, he signed an executive order that rolled back employment protections of LGBTQ government employees that were put in place by the previous governor. He said, "I believe these sort of issues should be passed by the legislative branch." He did not explain why it was inappropriate to regulate the employment of government workers through executive order. As governor, Brownback signed a law that followed college clubs to discriminate against LGBTQ people and still get funding, as long as they claimed their homophobia was religious. He also refused to follow Barack Obama's guidelines to address transphobic discrimination in schools and signed a bill that made it more difficult for trans people in Kansas to update their birth certificates. Before he became governor, Brownback was a U.S. representative. He consistently opposed all LGBTQ legislation, even calling marriage equality harmful to the future of the republic. So,
There we go.
yes. And racist Facebook post written by the owner of an Atlanta bar surfaced. Yesterday, the bar's drag queens walked out in protest.
That's reminiscent of Stonewall, huh?
Yeah. And Palmer Marsh, who owns the Buckhart's Pub, posted several racist messages on Facebook in 2015. One of them said that the South should have won the Civil War. Another called Barack Obama the N-word. So they all walked out of the bar, and
Good for them.
good for them. Okay.
And they probably did it in style. I have heels. I'm going to use them. My first
Stilettos.
My first. Remembering Mathilde, which is correctly pronounced how, Ann?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mathilde.
Crim. For those of us who remember the 80s and the beginning of the AIDS epidemic and the lack of information, Mathilde was a research scientist working on cancer research at Sloan Kettering. She was one of the first people to say, this is something to which we need to pay attention. This is something to which we need to devote our time and attention. This needs to be our priority in our research. And the thing that Mathilde did that very few other people did is she looked at the social impact of what was happening. She and her husband had both worked in civil rights and equality issues, so they got it, that here was a targeted group of people. And from having met her at low too many conferences, she was absolutely totally accessible. She was there and she went up to people and actually talked person to person and treated you as though you were someone whose life had meaning and value. And I can't tell you at that point in time how far that went. She was the mother that most people in the room didn't have, but wish they did. So, thank you.
May I insert an anecdote from our sister station, Gay USA?
Oh, if you must.
In Northrop.
I think Anne's slipping you money.
No. She was an AIDS activist in New York.
Oh, I know, yeah.
And she said Dr. Krim used to invite activists up to maybe their penthouse, certainly a very
Upscale.
upscale apartment in New York, and butlers would be going around offering hors d'oeuvres to the activists. She said it was, but you're right. All accounts of her are just glowing.
And what I forgot to mention is Bill Clinton gave her the Presidential Medal of Freedom
Yeah.
for recognition of her work. In a lightly less positive, we now know how much a person with HIV is worth. Aetna. Remember they sent out those notices, envelopes, window. Oh, it might have disclosed your HIV status. There was a class action suit filed. What I didn't appreciate when we had reported on this before is that I thought it was merely a few states in the Midwest. It was 23 states that were involved, 12,000 individuals.
Wow.
It was a $17 million settlement, which people might think that is a substantial amount of money. But what it comes down to is if I were the person whose status was revealed via the window in the envelope, I might be getting $500. If it was merely a disclosure to the vendor,
Like the postman? Or
I'm
woman?
getting $75.
That's obscene.
Moving on. Tonight there is a public hearing happening at the State House as we are here taping this, literally. And it's on 3 bills relative to firearms. S6, which is Senate Bill 6, House Bill 422, which passed the House last year, has been assigned to the Senate Judiciary Committee this year, and Senate Bill 221. And the 3 bills really quickly, S6, the first bill, would require that regardless of where a firearm is sold, a background check must be done. I can no longer go to the gun shop in Waterbury, purchase a firearm, and then come sell it to Linda in the parking lot. As Paul Heinz's very noted expose in 7 Days, where he purchased a semi-automatic weapon over the internet without being required to do a background check, and he purchased it with cash in a parking lot. H422 is the bill that was introduced into the House last year, passed the House, and what this would do is in the instance of domestic violence, which is why the purple, because purple is a recognition of domestic violence, it would allow law enforcement responding to immediately confiscate firearms, weapons within the household, and hold them for 5 days. And what research unfortunately has shown us is that it's the 5 days immediately following an incident when people are at the greatest risk.
Sure.
There's the greatest sort of adverse response to what was happening. S221 was drafted by Senator Dick Sears, who is the chair of Senate Judiciary and who might not have supported any kind of firearms legislation in the past. And what this bill would do, as I had reported on our last show, would create a new category called extreme risk, where I, as a law enforcement agent, might think that someone posed a risk to either themselves or others, and I feel that your firearm should be removed from your household or from your custody. But I, as the law enforcement officer, would have to file a petition with the court. The court would have to give due notice to the individual in question that a hearing was going to occur. The hearing.
It's too late.
I'm not done. Because the hearing has to happen, I have to give clear and convincing evidence of the risk that you might pose, and then get an order before I can take the guns or the firearms. In a related matter, there is committee hearing, I believe it's on Friday of this week, where law enforcement is coming in, and I just happened to find it because I was scanning all the work that the committee was doing, and it's from law enforcement to talk about firearm storage. Got my attention, so I did a little research. Apparently, law enforcement hasn't been supporting gun legislation because if they're required to confiscate, they say they have no place to put them.
Can they
Mike?
hire a storage,
My comment was, public safety has a morgue, put them there.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's all yours.
All
I mean,
right.
too bizarre not to be true,
Really?
No kidding.
but law enforcement is indeed going to be coming in and testifying that any legislation they enact that requires confiscation, they don't know where or how they are going to store the weapons.
Incredible. Well, let's move to Tunisia, not literally, but
We may want to find what they have for legislation.
We got enough trouble.
let's talk about the film festival in Tunisia. It's a 4-day event organized by Mojodin, Arabic for We Exist, a Tunisian non-governmental association that defends the rights of LGBT people. 12 short and medium-length films produced in Tunisia and across the Middle East are being shown. The festival opened Monday. In its first event, it's the first event of its kind, and organizers say the festival conceives of itself as audacious. Films speak of sexuality, identity, and gender affiliation, says Zenda Ben Jabara, a member of Mojudeen, a group founded in 2014. Through this festival, we would like to give a space for queer people in general in order to escape a bit from social pressure and also to identify with something, find a means to express ourselves, she said. We are trying to fight not only through the courts, but through art. Article 230 of the Penal Code in Tunisia includes a punishment of up to 3 years in prison for homosexuality, and young men are regularly detained and prosecuted. An online radio station catering to the LGBT community, upon which I have reported in the past, believed to be the first of its kind in the Arab world, started broadcasting in Tunisia on the 18th of December. Shams Rad, which was set up by the LGBT group Shams and promotes dignity and equality, is now facing legal procedures aimed at shutting it down. Shams received official recognition in May 2015 as an advocacy group for sexual minorities. So there's some unrest in Tunisia, as evidenced by the fact that police have dispersed LGBT protesters. Plainclothes Tunisian police on Saturday broke up a demonstration in the center of the capital, explaining it was for their own security, the security of the protesters.
Wow.
The scheduled time of the protest, a dozen protesters, including one bearing a sign calling for a secular state, were moved on by policemen in plain clothes. Now we have a picture before you of activist Amina Subui. She's a presenter on Shams Radio, and she's being forced into a vehicle as part of this disbursement in Tunis. She's an interesting person, member of Femen, the Ukrainian feminist group. They had information they were going to be targeted. They protested anyway, and the police dispersed them. Let's move to Jamaica, if we may, because we have positive news.
I'm still not getting off the boat.
No kidding.
No.
In fact, there's a beautiful,
Yeah, I'm
picture
sure.
of the shoreline. It banned, however, anti-gay Arizona pastor Stephen Anderson, who is pastor from the Faithful World Baptist Church, and he says that gay people should be stoned to death. This gentleman was denied entry.
He's in favor of marijuana reform? No?
Jamaica has banned a Holocaust-denying pastor, this is he, as a result of outcry from activists on the island. His church is in Tempe, Arizona. He was ready to get on the plane for Kingston when he was informed that he would not be allowed in Jamaica. The university that was going to sponsor his talk, the University of the West Indies, disinvited him. He is such a deplorable. Let me give you an account
just say
of
that,
some of
right?
his views. He once prayed for the death of Barack Obama. He's been denied entry into South Africa, Canada, the UK, and Botswana. Discrimination and the threat of violence against gay people in Jamaica remains pervasive, as we know. But activists have hoped that this ban could represent a shift in attitudes. This is a positive outcome for Jamaican LGBT people. More than 39,000 people signed the petition to deny his entry.
Good.
Okay. After the Pulse nightclub shooting, he prompted revulsion by saying that there were 50 less pedophiles in the world.
That's why I know his name.
He's also said a woman's place is at home raising children, not at work. So he's not going to Jamaica. Unfortunately, he'll
He's
be in
staying
Arizona.
here, right? Can't we send him somewhere?
The desert.
Really?
The desert.
Yes.
Tempe, take a left instead of a right.
Oh, God.
All right.
Now they're not letting our deplorables travel.
I know it. I don't know if that's good or bad. It's good.
Yeah,
It's good for Jamaica.
yeah. A prosecutor in Cincinnati, Ohio, asked a judge to let a 17-year-old transgender boy live with his grandparents in order to escape the abusive transphobic parents. Assistant Prosecutor Dan Clancy told the court yesterday that the teen teeters on the edge of suicidal ideation because of how he's treated by his parents. The parents refused to accept their son, forcing him to spend 6 hours a day in a room listening to Bible verses. They did not allow him to change appearance to a male look or seek hormone replacement therapy. When he started expressing suicidal thoughts in 2016, his parents took him to therapy at a Cincinnati Children's Hospital. They later pulled him out, though, because they still opposed his transition. And the Children's Hospital therapist had diagnosed the boy with gender dysphoria and were supportive of his transition. A federal court sided, and so he's going to be moving in with his grandparents.
Good.
So that's good for him. And a federal appeals court sided with a lesbian firefighter who claimed that she was harassed and discriminated against for years. The case involved Lori Francina, who started working for the Providence Fire Department in 2002 and quickly rose to the rank of lieutenant. In 2006, she was harassed by one of her subordinates who wouldn't stop making inappropriate comments, even when she told him on multiple occasions that he had to stop. He also walked in on her changing room wearing only his underwear and refused to leave while she was shouting at him.
Showing all his shortcomings.
When Francina reported his insubordination, the other firefighters turned against her as well. One of them refused to cook for her at the station, and when he did, she said it would make her sick. She traded plates one day with another firefighter, and he got sick instead of her.
Oh my gosh.
They started
Literally.
calling her names like Frangina, rhyming
Yeah. I
with
know.
vagina, bitch, and lesbo. Her subordinates would make comments like, "Who does that fucking bitch think she is?" when she would tell them to do something. And the fire department ignored her complaints. And they didn't limit themselves to verbal insults. They would leave written insults on a whiteboard like, "Frangina leads Team Lesbo to victory." The firefighters also refused to do their jobs when they were with her. Usually it was annoying things like referring to carrying stretchers. The harassment sometimes put people's life at risk, like when a firefighter refused to put an oxygen mask on a woman because Frangina ordered him to. Another firefighter refused to follow her order and drive a rescue vehicle with a car accident victim in it. The victim later died. The harassment and insubordination continued for years. She was transferred to a different station and she filed complaints that were ignored. But one incident made her leave her job. Frangina and other firefighters responded to a suicide attempt by a man who had shot himself in the head. She tried to get her subordinates to help her put the man in a stretcher. They repeatedly refused. So she had to get a police officer on the scene to help her. Once in the rescue vehicle, a firefighter performed CPR. Afterwards, he looked at Frangina and took off his gloves in a way that splattered blood and brains all over her. She sued the city of Providence under Title VII, and numerous other women who worked at the fire department testified about pervasive harassment and discrimination against them. In 2016, she won her trial. The city appealed, though, effectively arguing that she was discriminated against because she was a lesbian, not because she's a woman. They said she had to prove that gay men weren't harassed at the department to show her discrimination was based on sex.
Oh
I want to
gosh.
pull. I want to
So-
pull their license.
That's a horrible story.
Isn't that awful?
They weren't providing essential medical care.
I know
No,
I know it.
no. People die. I mean, someone
I-
died.
It sounds like several people.
Yes, and they just refused to. If she asked them to do something, she refused to do it. And I guess I will do one story, and then I want to talk about L.
Yeah.
So, a former Amazon employee was convicted of federal hate crime for punching a coworker in the face, and this hate crime and sexual orientation is not covered by Virginia hate crime laws. So, I don't know how far he's going to get with that, but. And, geez, there's so many stories, so
I
little
was going to
time.
say
isn't there?
Amazon, the site in Indiana that they were considering for the headquarters pulled out because Amazon was looking at ensuring diversity
Yeah,
and equality in the
absolutely.
workplace, and they didn't want to have to comply.
Yeah.
And so they lose all that business. I mean, really.
So you have
So-
a friend.
Oh, and I have a clip actually of the comedian
Oh, my
Bob
friend.
Smith.
Bob Smith, who died at 52. So I want to make sure that clip gets in there and that people see it. He was very funny, and we're all going to in the
He was
community
the
are all
first
going to
openly
miss him.
gay comedian on Jay Leno.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll show the clip now.
I am in a relationship. I have been for 8 years with a guy named Tom, and we moved in together about 6 years ago. And you know, right away I knew Tom was a marvelous interior decorator. Because back then we lived in a studio apartment in Greenwich Village, and Tom, using mirrors, made it look like 12 rooms on Central Park West. When the sun came in, our sofa went up in flames. Please, we have track lighting in our refrigerator. And you know, Tom and I are becoming more militant. We want the same rights as straight couples to hold hands and make a public display of affection, even if we do avoid intimacy in the privacy of our own home.
I think there is a gay sensibility, I think, that comes from being a member of a minority group in majority society in the sense that, you know, Jewish comics or black comics or women, you're all looking from the outside in.
I was actually in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Someone brought me the local newspaper there. This was really cool. The local newspaper prints gay and lesbian wedding announcements. I think this is great. I can't wait until like newspapers all over North America start doing this. Mr. and Mrs. Stephen Douglas have reluctantly announced the engagement of their son Timothy to Mark Feldman, the son of the stunned Dr. and Mrs. Saul Feldman. A May commitment ceremony is planned with an awkward reception to immediately follow. At the parents' request, there will be an open bar during the ceremony.
I think what I bring to stand-up comedy is a point of view of a gay man that isn't the victim, isn't the butt of the joke. I'm making the joke. And that's an important thing. You know, in stand-up comedy for years, you know, gay men have always been, you know, the joke. And I just turn it around saying, laugh with me, but you're not going to be laughing at me.
And Alberta Perkins, who we all called Al, and I have a picture of her, started Crohn's.
The glorious hat.
Yeah. Was the founder of Crohn's, which was a lesbian organization that started about 25 years ago. It was a social group in Burlington. Ann and I had gone to a couple of events. She did a wonderful vegetarian Thanksgiving every year that we all enjoyed going to. And she died at the age of 92. Her memorial service will be held at the Quaker Meeting House on 173 North Prospect Street on February 10th at 12:30. For all the friends of Al who want to go, I hope to see you there.
I remember Crohn's.
I remember Al.
Yeah.
Not that I was ever invited to Crohn's. Nor should I have. Vermont Media. Maybe some LGBT 101 wouldn't be such a bad idea. Most recently, in an issue of 7 Days, to their Dear Althena, their equivalent of Dear Abby column, someone wrote in saying that they had an interest in, might like to meet some male to female transsexuals. I don't know where they pulled that language from, but Dear Althena's response was to suggest they might go to the Pride Center to one of the trans support groups. I wasn't aware that the trans support group was a meet and greet. Neither did the other people from the trans community or the Pride Center who deluged 7 Days so that they issued an immediate apology. And there was a meeting that occurred between the Pride Center and the editorial staff of 7 Days. This is so reminiscent of what happened with the Burlington Free Press, where we essentially were identified as the agents of the apocalypse. And as I said earlier, I'm not sure how they recognized us without our horses. But that also precipitated a apology and a meeting between Outright Vermont Trans Support Group, members of the community, to meet with the editorial staff. It seems Vermont media, regardless of how long they may have been covering our efforts for full equality, still don't have it right. Primary Care Network. My concern, very quickly, is that in the most recent Federal Budget Act, there was not funded allocated for the rural health centers. Vermont has 13 rural health centers. It is where most Vermonters get care. It is Vermont's primary care network. Looking at the LGBT communities, we traditionally don't go for health care because we're afraid of discrimination, having to come out to multiple providers. Mm-hmm. So having a primary care provider, the person to whom we are always going, helps diminish that apprehensive. And the more health care you get, sort of the better health you might have.
Yeah.
If somebody is looking at everything that's happening with you and ensuring that it's all being taken care of. However, there is a bill that is going through the Senate currently that would establish a publicly funded primary care network here in Vermont. If healthcare is of a concern, people should be looking for this piece of legislation, but also know that the governor has repeatedly stated he would not support legislation that imposed new fees or taxes. So this would take significant push.
Okay.
But you have more exotic places that you'd like to
Let's
take me to
push.
quickly.
Well, I'd like
Yeah.
to introduce us again to Laverne Cox,
Ah.
who many of us know.
Did she go somewhere?
Yeah, well, she was honored in South Africa. The South African edition of Cosmopolitan
All
has
right.
made her the first trans woman cover. She's in Orange is the New Black Star, as we
Yep.
know. The title of the LGBT-focused cover and issue is Say Yes to Love. It's the Say Yes to Love edition. Holly Meadows, the editor-in-chief of Cosmo South Africa, said our goal was to play a small part in providing visibility for the LGBTQIA+ community, of which Laverne has become a revolutionary icon. She continued, we wanted to disrupt heteronormative ideas around February and Valentine's Day and look at love in 2018, including acceptance of self and others and non-binary relationships. She continued, Cox is the world's most vocal trans poster girl and an activist for the intersection of race, class, and gender identities, challenging toxic masculinity, white supremacy, and the misrepresentation of trans people. For us at Cosmo, love, at least for this issue, is celebrating Laverne as the fun, fearless female she is. And in celebration of Laverne, I have a short clip from her taking the Cosmo quiz.
Hi, I'm Laverne Cox, and this is a world-exclusive photo shoot for Cosmopolitan, South Africa. And I'm your cover girl. My celebrity crush. Drake. Hi, Drake. I'm fancy. If I got stuck in an elevator, the person I would want to be stuck with is Oprah Winfrey. My most treasured possession is my Emmy. I don't know how that sounds, but I love having an Emmy. Thank you, Academy. The most romantic thing anyone has ever done for me. So as a Black transgender woman, I've often been kept a secret by the men that I've dated. And so when my ex-boyfriend introduced me to his dad and invited me to spend Hanukkah with him and his family, it was the most special thing ever. Trans women deserve to be loved out in the open and in the light. My message for Cosmo readers is let go of fear and live a fun, fearless life. If I can do it, you can do it.
There's a quiz?
Well, you'll see. Let's move to Myanmar, formerly Burma.
I should have studied.
It's having the biggest LGBT event ever. It's the first ever drag Olympics occurring at it's
Wow.
the And Proud LGBT Film Festival. The first installment will feature Myanmar's first drag Olympics. The evening of the 28th, which we missed, will include This Kind of Love, a story of renowned LGBT activist Woo Young Myo Min, as well as performances from DJs and musicians. So we have a picture now of one of the Out and Proud festival in Myanmar.
You know what we didn't talk about, which we were going to talk about, was Americans less accepting of LGBTQ people.
And there's an 86% increase in the incident of homicide last year against the LGBT communities.
And why do you think it's going down? Do you think it's just,
I think there may be some national, federal
Influence.
input.
in that?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Over the 4 days, can I continue
Yes.
about this festival?
Yeah.
It's set to host 23 films from 10 countries, including movies from the Philippines, South Korea, and China. February 1, coming right up, will feature live performances and the showing of 2 Myanmar documentaries that were produced for the festival. The first and proud event was hosted in 2014, but this is going to be the biggest one. So, good news from Myanmar.
Yes.
I'd like to turn next to 2 same-sex couples who were wrongly denied their citizenship of their children. Allison Blixt and Stephanie Zakari have sons Lucas and Masi. Lucas was denied U.S. citizenship because he's not biologically related to the American citizen. Zakari is a citizen of Italy. They've sued the government over the decision on Monday.
That's unbelievable.
In addition,
It gets worse.
Elia Devish Banks and his husband Andrew Devish Banks had twins, Aiden and Ethan. Ethan was denied U.S. citizenship because he's biologically related to the Israeli father and not to the U.S. father. So we have a short clip from them talking about these decisions.
You don't choose in life who you love. Love is love. It doesn't matter the gender.
I grew up in Los Angeles, California.
I was born in Israel and grew up there in Tel Aviv.
Because of DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, I couldn't sponsor Elad because we're a same-sex couple.
We wanted to live in New York and we couldn't live in New York because the US government didn't recognize our relationship.
A lot of this is not out there. People really don't know how these laws affect us.
When we met, we did talk about having a family, so we knew we were both on the same page and it was something we would do down the line.
I always knew I'm going to have a family with kids and a partner, and we're going to create this unit together. Both parents of these kids are on their birth certificates, but one was denied U.S. citizenship because he doesn't have a genetic connection to the U.S. citizen.
It's shocking because they're brothers and they're treated differently. Why doesn't Lucas have American citizenship? It's the laws and the policies and the government saying, no, you're not, treated as his mother. It makes me feel, again, rejected, all the things I felt from the US.
Who is the mother? Who is the biological mother? It doesn't really matter. We are both mothers.
How am I going to explain this to him when he grows up? You're different than your brother. He's a U.S. citizen at birth. You are not. It's creating an issue from something that shouldn't be an issue.
We want our children to be happy and healthy and supported and loved.
That's all we really want. We want a healthy, happy family.
And the truth is, there is not such a thing as equality yet. Like, we are not treated the same.
None of it makes sense. It's not right, and we know it's not right.
You can make a change in the world. Maybe it's a very small change, but it will help a lot of other people. And I think that's what we're doing right now, fixing something that is not fair and fighting for what's right.
All right. I think we should go on to, is it the book review or?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't mean to be pushy, but let me just show you a picture of the Cuban woman and her kids.
Oh, sure.
And her grandkids who were granted custody. The daughter died, the grandmother and her partner, who's the godmother of the kids. There's a picture of the 5 of them. And the Cuban government made the right decision in this context, which
Putting
is
them
a
in a
breakthrough.
lesbian household.
Yeah. Yeah.
First time, I think. Okay. Shall we move on to the book
To the
review?
book review.
This,
We're going to have a book review by Anne Charles.
why, yes. And this review was published in the January 5th edition of the Lambda Literary Review. The book is before you. It's called Nasty Women, Feminism, Resistance, and Revolution in Trump's America.
How did they know our name?
I want to know why your photograph's not on the cover.
Well, let
Go
me give you some
ahead. Go ahead.
On October 19th, 2016, many of us recall this, I'm sure, in the third presidential debate, Hillary Clinton introduced a statement pledging to raise taxes on the wealthy with a jab about Donald Trump's personal tax evasion. Such a nasty woman, Trump retorted into the mic. And a popular meme and loosely articulated resistance movement was born. Like many on social media, the editors of this collection have adopted this descriptor to encapsulate the range of sites of struggle advocated by the 23 female contributors to this volume. One salient point asserted by this book is that while all the essays opposed Donald Trump in his presidency, this group of nasty women is not monolithic. Besides big-name, white, cisgendered, heterosexual feminist writers like Katha Pollitt, Rebecca Solnit, and Cheryl Strayed, the collection includes lesser-known contributors writing from multiple perspectives and addressing a variety of topics. Sarah Michael Hollenbeck, an owner of Chicago's legendary feminist bookstore Women and Children First, decries Trump's treatment of people with disabilities. Jill Filipovic, a lawyer and journalist based in Nairobi, analyzes the effects on Ghana of Trump's global gag rule that defunds any foreign organization providing information about abortion. Mary Catherine Nagel, a Cherokee activist and playwright, places the Trump White House as only the latest in a series of presidential administrations that have systematically oppressed and deracinated Native populations. Adjunct English professor Melissa Arona provides a disturbing account of heavily monitored life in South Texas, marked by high-tech aerostats and harassment from vindictive immigration agents. Another notable feature of this volume is that several essays revise, recapitulate, and argue with each other. African-American journalist Collier Meyerson's Pulling the Wool Over Their Eyes, The Blindness of White Feminists, criticizes the nasty women movement's commodification of T-shirts, buttons, and memes by invoking Bitch Media co-founder Andy Zisler's derisive label of such phenomena as marketplace feminism. Several writers are highly critical of the January 21 Women's March of last year, affirming trans activist Meredith Toulousen's assertion in We've Always Been Nasty, Why the Feminist Movement Needs Trans Women and Gender Nonconforming Femmes, that, quote, now is not the time to be conciliatory. Similarly, in an analysis entitled Donald Trump's War on the Working Class, writer Sarah Jaffe observes, quote, in considering what resistance looks like, I would caution against cheering for marches that win hugs from police and frown at a thrown brick. Yet Black Lives Matter co-founder Alicia Garza, who also identifies as queer, shares her conflicts about participating in the march. Before concluding in How to Build a Movement, I decided to challenge myself to be part of something that wasn't perfect, that wouldn't articulate the values that I did, but that I'd still show up for, clear in my commitment, open and vulnerable to people who were new in their activism. Garza affirms finally the long-held feminist tenet that coalition building is the most viable avenue of resistance. As with most collections of this nature, some pieces are more persuasive than others. Nuanced analysis occurs in refusing to numb the pain. Sarah Hippola's account of her personal recovery from alcohol dependency during the Trump era. Sadie Doyle, in The Pathology of Donald Trump, argues carefully that the current trend of ascribing mental illness to Trump demonizes the mentally ill and disguises Trump's very sane but deliberately abusive nature. Kara Bolodnik, in Is There a Right Time to Talk to Your Children About Fascism, recounts being reminded of the Holocaust constantly as a child, and thus learning that hatred never goes away. Now, as she and her wife Meredith struggle to acclimate their 5-year-old black son to Trump's America, Bolodnik speaks for many of us when she reflects on the current political climate. I'm not shocked that we've arrived at this place. For so many communities, this has always been America. If you're black or Muslim or Latinx or a woman or LGBTQ. Yet she concludes that confronting these bitter truths, and I'm quoting here, doesn't need to wholly define us, because it's too easy to succumb to despair. Accordingly, Bolodnik and Meredith undertake a course of resistance by raising their son in the company of passionate activists who regularly attend political actions with him. I'm writing this review, it was December 23rd, the weekend after Donald Trump signed the Republican tax bill, a vicious measure depriving millions of citizens of their health care and authorizing drilling into Alaska's Arctic wildlife refuge, as well as perpetrating unconscionable economic crimes against the U.S. middle class, working poor, and otherwise disenfranchised. We need an army of resistors, including a strong contingent of self-identified nasty women and those who reject the term but espouse the philosophy, to combat this toxic administration and its leader now more than ever. I'm hopeful that reading this anthology will not only inform and provoke us, but that it will strengthen our collective resolve.
Very good.
Fini.
It sounds fascinating.
It really was very interesting.
like-
All kinds of different perspectives I hadn't thought about. Now, should we?
I was just reading the back where it listed the authors and sort of this is what their narrative was about, and like, ooh, I want to read that one.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, shall we move on to the trivia question?
We should.
Because I have the answer right here in front of me.
All right.
This was the first known gay youth organization in the U.S. And there was a little education that went along with this. Many of the militant hustlers and street queens involved in the Campton Cafeteria riot, which occurred August 1966 in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, were members of Vanguard, the first known gay youth organization in the U.S. Vanguard had been organized earlier that year with the help of radical ministers working with the Glide Memorial Church in the Tenderloin. A lesbian group of people was also formed called the Street Orphans. There's going to be more history to come, and hopefully at this point, Zach is going to put back up the link to Out in the Mountains and where you can find the archive, because we have history. We really didn't know about the Campton Cafeteria riots until we started researching this piece.
Yeah.
It may be a future trivia answer.
And now let's close with the final directive of resist.